So I know that earlier, one of the things that you had addressed with me was the concept of cytokine storm.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that.
So yeah, go ahead.
With that text that Callie sent me about, don't take elderberry syrup, which is something I love. And I take that regularly for my throat, whatever. And she said, and I started looking up cytokine.
Yes.
Storm. That sounded scary. So it sounded like it could be pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, depending on where it is and when. And it sounds like maybe in the face of this virus, it goes into the storm action. Does that make sense?
So this concept of the cytokine storm, which I'm going to explain in a little more detail here, as
That's
something...
my layperson sketch.
Well, I understand that those who are tuning in here may have a wide variety. Some may be more educated than me in this area, some may be less, and some may be right at the same level of information on this. But just to kind of summarize the concept of cytokine storm. So this notion that your immune system produces chemicals that are involved in kind of marshaling its defenses and fighting an infection, ending up actually becoming harmful in some way or part of the harm from the infection, is something that dates back a number of years. I know that this concept had been discussed in scientific circles back when SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, was on the scene years ago, which is caused by a virus. And there was a theory at that time that seemed to be borne out by some of the research, corroborated by some of the research, that the immune system, in an attempt to fight certain viruses, and by the way, I mean, it's worth noting, of course, parenthetically here, that this is how our immune system does fight microbial infections. An organism enters the body, enters the cell, or comes in contact with the cell, and or enters it, and this initiates a cascade of chemical responses by the immune system where it's signaling the other cells to get ready. So
watch out, there's an invader.
Right. And so these cytokines are chemical messengers, again, trying to marshal the other components of the immune system to do their thing. But some of these cytokines, as you were mentioning, are inflammatory. And inflammation serves a role. People might say, well, why would the body generate inflammation? Because inflammation, in a controlled manner, can be protective, because it's something that can help to bring blood flow to an area, and it's something that can be useful not only in fighting the infection immunologically, but in healing. However, too much of this inflammation, too many of these cytokines could actually end up being harmful and could actually end up contributing to some of the harm, some of the negative, perhaps some of the lung damage that could be associated with certain infections. Okay, so that's some of the past information about cytokine storm and how the attempt by the immune system might end up being in some ways counterproductive or harmful. Now fast forward to COVID-19, so this novel coronavirus. Any questions based on what I've said so far?
No.
Okay.
No.
So fast forward to COVID-19. It's less clear whether cytokine storm is really a problem with this virus. And we're still there's still in the process of learning about this virus, and probably will be for some time now. But with SARS, one of the clues that cytokine storm was a problem was that the very young were dying at an inordinately high rate. They had a high mortality, high fatality rate. So it was the very young and the very old. Now, very old we can understand because,
right,
again, the bodies are not as strong. There are other, what we call comorbidities, other conditions. But why the very young? And the thought was that their immune response was so robust that it was generating all this inflammation. So far, we don't appear to be seeing this with this particular mutation.
Right. At all.
Right. In fact, if you look at more
Gratefully.
at the case fatality rates, the number of people who die out of those infected under the age of 10, it's vanishingly low.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely low. In fact, I think I saw a statistic recently. I'm not an epidemiologist, so forgive me, I may be off by a point or so here or there. But a statistic that I recently saw showed that under the age of 7, there was actually 0% case fatality rate. So anyway, cytokine storm, it's a possibility. It could turn out to be a problem. But in this case, I think it is so far proving to be less likely, and therefore I wouldn't be concerned about things like elderberry as being harmful.
So what do you think about in diet? Do you think it would be best to focus on anti-inflammatory foods, like a lot of vegetables and a lot of alkaline food, and not so much processed, not highly acidic? Maybe not even nightshades if they aggravate you at all. Maybe just try to do everything to keep everything as serene and calm as possible.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that in the sense that foods that are pro-inflammatory, and that can vary from individual to individual. Some people, I think, are more sensitive to lectins. Some people are more sensitive to nightshades, which tend to be high in lectins. And these are inflammatory compounds, inflammatory molecules. And anything that's going to trigger unnecessary or excessive inflammation could be problematic. And on the other side of that, as you just said, the other side of it is that eating foods that are less inflammatory, things that are rich in phytonutrients, pigment-rich foods, berries, things like that. These reduce oxidative stress. They reduce a chemical called nuclear factor kappa B that's involved in viral replication, that's involved in inflammation. And so eating those nutrient-dense, pigment-rich foods can be an important part of this. One other dietary comment is that inasmuch as antibodies, which is those are the bows and the arrows and the guns, and these are the elements used by the immune system to fight infection, antibodies, the other name for them is immunoglobulins. And globulins are proteins. So keeping protein intake up is particularly important for immune system health. And it's also worth noting that insulin, sugar, and the insulin response, there's some evidence to show may have some immunosuppressive properties. And so avoiding sugars and simple carbohydrates also is supportive in this way.
Excellent.
I think that one was a little less long-winded than my other answer, which is good.
There's something else I wanted to ask you about with food. What was it?
So I know we had talked about inflammation, we had talked about cytokines, and then there was also mention that you had made about stress and about the effects of stress.
Thank you for reading my questions,
on the
which I haven't looked at since.
Thank you. And so stress, which is very difficult to escape, especially with what's going on, it really is kind of it's an unfortunate reality, and in a sense, I guess, kind of a catch-22, because we want to be vigilant about our health and vigilant about good hygiene measures, but this vigilance can easily cause or trigger or potentiate anxiety and stress, which then has a negative effect on the immune system and thus impairs the ability of our body to fight infections. So some useful things for stress management. Most important for mitigating, it doesn't change your stress, but it mitigates the effects of stress, is exercise.
Right.
I'm looking forward to going home today, getting my exercise in, but it is borne out, as you well know.
I do, and I'm kind of slipped, so I'm working on that.
So we're gonna vow to each other today.
All right. Okay.
that definitely. We're going to
It's so important. I
It
know. I
is.
mean, you feel so different after you exercise.
And that feeling that you get is a result, as you know, of neurotransmitters, endorphins, and a reduction in cortisol. Cortisol, which is the kind of the quintessential stress hormone, interferes with, suppresses the immune system. So lowering cortisol with exercise has we call it disinhibitory, or ultimately a stimulating effect on the immune system. So that's an important one. It's essential. It's essential.
Whatever you can do.
That's
and
right.
You can always make progress. You don't have to start out.
That's right. I said just keep moving. And a couple of other things nutritionally that are useful. One is inositol. Inositol has a long history in psychopharmacology with regard to its ability to kind of have an anti-anxiety effect. So this is a B vitamin. B vitamins in general are good. Inositol in particular, it causes your cells to respond more readily to serotonin. So it's something that is, again, useful. Lemon balm is another one where there's some clinical studies showing that it can reduce the stress response.
What do you think about l-theanine?
I like L-theanine very much.
Yeah.
L-theanine is, interestingly enough, so here L-theanine comes up, another component of what our new hero, green tea.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Quite useful.